Namaste, assalamu alaikum, shalom, buenos dias, ni hao, heseche, akwaba, welcome in, what up, though? This is just an announcement. So the short of it is I'm planning to go on hiatus, offline, indefinitely, for a little while, presumably. That's the short of it. So that's it. This next part is somewhat of an explanation for those who are interested. For those who know me, or know me well enough, many perceive me as different. And over a decade ago, when I graduated from law school, amidst a considerable amount of hysteria within society, and hostility as well, I communicate a significant amount of disagreement without hostility, and the vitriol and the hysteria, and I have arguments with loved ones about this, and to the extent where I get accused of being crazy, and I'm locked up previously in a psych ward accordingly. So obviously that is a challenging experience, and it's a that's a whole nother story, and adverse circumstances continue for a number of years since then, through today. The point of me sharing that at this moment is because during that first lockup, as part of the conditions of my release, effectively, I signed basically an agreement to receive welfare. And so since that point, over the past decade, I receive welfare from the settler government on a monthly basis. Initially, in the initial preceding years from that point, I live in my Moore's house, and so for the most part, I abstain from even utilizing it. And when I do utilize it, I utilize it for certain clandestine activities. That's another story. There is a point for a few years I abstained from using money at all. Again, predominantly living from the contributions and support of my Moore and my family. About a decade ago, I moved into an apartment, a flat, and I begin to utilize again the money, and I do so for the past decade essentially. There are certain arrangements that are made to cover this domicile, primarily. So, anyways, that being said. And throughout, I continue to. People may consider me a hypocrite for being on welfare, first of all, and not working or whatever else. I do work. It's just my work is valued in a different way. And some may consider me a hypocrite for wailing against the machine, criticizing settler government, this, that, and the other, whilst accepting welfare. That's understandable. That logic is understandable. I disagree with it because. Well, first of all, there's the element of truth within that. So I abstain from categorically disagreeing with it. This is how I legitimate it or rationalize it for myself, because it's difficult to do. Basically, there's the consideration of me essentially existing as a political prisoner and living in a certain arrangement of house arrest. And so the consideration is, within such conditions, is it acceptable for such an individual to receive or to accept the provisions that are provided to the individual to sustain the individual's life? I compare it to being a political prisoner locked in a jail, and whether that person being locked up because of the person's dissent or dissidence towards the government, and whether or not it's acceptable for that individual to accept the portions, the rations that the jailer provides to the individual, the political prisoner, whilst being locked up unjustly. So that's the kind of rationale that I utilize for myself in accepting that. That's arguable. It is what it is. I invite somebody to share with me an increasingly honest means of livelihood. So that's the arrangement for over the past decade. And so I receive a monthly contribution. My what's it called? My commissary on a monthly basis, and that goes towards food, internet, mobile phone, and additionally, so it's an extremely modest amount. It's probably it's beyond what a lot of people have. However, I'm not even gonna compare it. It's a modest amount, and I make do with it. So there's that. I provide also that throughout the past decade, I look for other means of maintaining support in an increasingly genuine and honest manner that is mutually agreeable amongst the direct participants or directly involved entities, including myself. And so I look for institutions, organizations, communities that are genuinely pluralistic, that abstain from being adversarial towards other, particularly ethnic or religious groups, and that are genuinely dedicated towards the well-being of all beings, essentially. It's difficult to find such organizations. Even those organizations that are established with such a mandate tend to be backed by a comparatively homogenous group, either religiously or ethnically. And so the decision making, the leadership, and everything else tends to be skewed in that respect. So one, it's difficult to find a generally pluralistic or an organization that explicitly dedicated to pluralism, and then dos, an organization that is generally pluralistic in nature, that has that mandate. So I spend years, over a decade, looking for that and striving, and have yet to find it. I still haven't found what I'm looking for. Haha. So that being said, all this being said, and simultaneously, I'm actually uninterested in having money, and that's the other thing too, is that there's blood, there's tears, there's sweat on every monetary note, and so in the past decade plus, I also strive for building an alternative currency system, and so that's also challenging. So, there's something else I was going to say before that. Well, I'll let that go at the moment. So, at this point, I share all this because for the past decade, the contribution, the commissary is made on a regular basis at the beginning of the month, and there are certain it has yet to be made at this point, and so it may be considered just a clerical oversight, something else. However, that might be somewhat naive or simplistic. So often messages are sent in very subtle ways, and additionally. But anyways, the point is that it's been about those weeks, and the contribution has yet to be made. There are some circumstances that occur a couple weeks ago that can explain such a decision, but even just understanding recent events and developments within settler society, and additionally, it's understandable. So that being said, there is less anticipation of, how should I put this? Well, because the contribution has yet to be made, I am making the decision to close my my internet account, my internet access, as well as my mobile phone, all the recurring bills, to abstain from incurring additional charges. So rather than going through the rigmarole of soliciting the contribution or whatever, because that's part of the shtick as well. It's just a matter of doing without it. So some may perceive that as excessive or a heavy-handed response or an unnecessary response. I invite you to consider further the conditions. Some may ask me, well, do I have other people that could provide me with support and intercede or provide something? I can ask individuals. However, effectively, this is something that is appropriate for me to do as I am. As I mentioned, I try reaching out for over a decade, and there has yet to be established a proficient arrangement. So the circumstances are what the circumstances are, and I continue. So all that being said, I plan to continue, God willing, I will continue doing basically the same things I do on a daily basis. It's just doing it offline. I consider the potential of recording some of the things that I do. However, I anticipate even just after a week that accumulating a considerable amount of storage, and so I consider how worth it is to do that. The idea would be to upload it eventually amidst returning back online, if that is what happens. However, again, even after a week of archiving, that's a considerable amount of memory. My computer abstains. My computer only has a modest amount of memory, and the hard drive that I have also has a certain amount of memory available. So I'm uncertain about how much I may record, but I continue to do the studies. I continue to do the development as much as I can. Obviously, being without a phone and being without internet access limits much of the communication that I previously do. It limits doing the same communication that I do in the previous months and years, and additionally. So there are projects that I have to work on offline that become pushed to the side a little bit. So I intend to give those additional attention, and I also recognize how the cosmos works and the universe works, the will of God works, and everything happens for a reason. So I intend to provide additional concentration on those endeavors. And for those who are so inclined, you're welcome to visit here. And other than that, I continue to do what I do here in our Sona Ashram, in our UNI village, in the heights of Cuyahoga, amidst the area of the Big Lakes in Turtle Island. That's much of it. So yeah. All right, y'all. That being said, namaste, assalamu alaikum, shalom, adios, zaijian, tehe chakaris, asamodwo, kele ofred. Love and peace.